It was 11:47 at night when someone knocked on my door wearing my jacket and nothing that explained why. I want to start there, because that's the exact second my quiet, boring, thoroughly uneventful life in this apartment building stopped being quiet, boring, or uneventful. If you'd told me that morning that I'd end the day standing in my doorway, staring at my neighbor wrapped in a jacket I hadn't seen in 5 months, I would have laughed and gone back to reheating my noodles. But that's how these things work, isn't it? You don't see the turn coming until you're already standing in it. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 30, I do freelance architecture work from a cramped one-bedroom in Chicago, and my downstairs neighbor is a 27-year-old American photographer named Emily Carter, who moved in 8 months ago with 2 suitcases, one very stubborn cat, and absolutely no interest in small talk. Emily and I weren't friends, we were hallway acquaintances, which is a very specific kind of relationship where you know someone's schedule better than their last name. I knew she left for shoots around 7 a.m. I knew she hummed off-key in the elevator. I knew she hated the building's slow heater as much as I did. What I didn't know, until that night, was that she still had my jacket. Let me back up. Back in March, there'd been a freak ice storm that knocked out power for half the block. I found Emily on the stairwell, soaked, shivering, arms wrapped around a bag of camera equipment like it was a baby. She'd been locked out. Her spare key hadn't worked in months, and naturally that was the night she discovered it. I didn't think twice. I took off my jacket, put it around her shoulders, and let her wait in my apartment until the building super showed up with a spare. She left an hour later, jacket still on, mumbling something about washing it and bringing it back tomorrow. Tomorrow became a week. A week became 2 months. 2 months became the kind of thing you stop mentioning because mentioning it feels weirdly intimate, like you're keeping score of something that was never a transaction in the first place. So when the knock came that night, 3 sharp raps, a pause, 1 more, I wasn't expecting anything except maybe a noise complaint. I opened the door already halfway into an apology for whatever I'd apparently done. Emily stood there in my jacket. Just my jacket, bare legs, wet hair stuck to her forehead like she'd walked through rain that hadn't fallen in Chicago in days, and an expression that was somewhere between defiant and terrified. "Before you say anything," she said, "I know how this looks." "I genuinely have no idea how this looks," I said, which was a lie, because my brain had already sprinted through several increasingly unhelpful theories. "Are you okay?" "No," her voice cracked on the word, and that's when I noticed her hands were shaking. Not cold shaking, something else. I stepped back and let her in without asking anything else, because some questions can wait, and this clearly wasn't the moment for them. She sat on my couch, knees pulled to her chest, my jacket swallowing her whole, and for a solid minute she just breathed. I put the kettle on because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do, and because it gave both of us something to look at besides each other. "My apartment flooded," she finally said. "Pipe burst in the wall behind my closet. Everything's soaked, my clothes, my negatives, some prints I can't replace." She laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. I grabbed my camera bag and ran. This, she gestured at the jacket, was hanging by my door. I didn't even think. I just put it on. Okay, that's a real emergency. That's not weird at all. That's not the weird part." I handed her tea and sat down, careful to leave space between us. The kind of space that says I'm not going to make this harder than it already is. "The weird part," she said, staring into the mug, "is that I've had this jacket for 5 months and I never brought it back. And it wasn't because I forgot. I waited. I liked having something of yours," she said. "That's it. That's the confession. It smelled like cedar and coffee, and on nights when this city made me feel like absolutely nobody, I'd put it on and it made my apartment feel less like a box I was renting and more like somewhere I actually lived. I told myself I'd give it back eventually. I never meant eventually to become never. I want to tell you I said something smooth right then. I didn't. I sat there holding my own mug like it contained the correct response, and all I managed was, "You could have just asked to keep it." That felt like admitting something. "Admitting what?" She looked up at me, and for the first time in 8 months of hallway nods and elevator small talk, Emily Carter looked at me like she was deciding whether to jump off something high. "That I've had a very inconvenient crush on my very quiet neighbor since March," she said, and stealing his jacket was somehow easier than saying that out loud. The heater clicked on in the silence that followed, loud and ordinary, completely unbothered by the fact that my entire evening had just tilted sideways. Inconvenient how? I asked, because apparently that was the detail my brain latched onto. Because you're my neighbor. Because if this goes badly, I still have to see you in the mailroom for the next year. Because I'm the kind of person who plans everything, and this, she gestured between us, was not part of any plan. I should mention that up to this point, I'd built an entire quiet fortress around the idea that whatever I felt about Emily Carter was a problem to be ignored, not solved. Every time she'd laughed at something I said in the elevator, every time she'd left a coffee outside my door on days I clearly hadn't slept, I'd filed it under neighborly and moved on. It was safer that way. Fortresses usually are. But fortresses don't hold up well against someone sitting on your couch, soaked, honest, wrapped in your jacket, telling you the truth at midnight because her apartment flooded and she ran out of places to hide it. I wasn't planning on saying anything either, I told her. I've been rehearsing not saying anything for months. Her eyebrows went up. You have? I have a whole speech about why it's a bad idea, wrong timing, living 12 feet apart, general cowardice. I rub the back of my neck. It's a great speech. I give it to myself in the shower. That got the first real laugh out of her, the kind that breaks tension instead of building it. So what changed? She asked. You're currently sitting in my apartment, wearing my jacket, telling me you like me because you flooded out of your own place. I feel like the universe skipped the part where I gave my speech and went straight to the ending. Bad ending or good ending? I haven't decided. Ask me again in 10 minutes. We sat there a while longer, the kettle cooling, rain starting up again outside for real this time, and something between us settling into a shape that felt less like a confession and more like a beginning. She told me about the flood, the insurance calls she'd have to make in the morning, the negatives she was mourning, the fact that she'd have nowhere to sleep that night. I told her she could take the bed and I'd take the couch, and she gave me a look like she wanted to argue and then didn't, because it was midnight and neither of us had the energy left to be stubborn about logistics. Before she went to change into something dry, my sweatpants, because apparently I was outfitting her entire wardrobe that night, she paused at the hallway doorway, the same spot where 5 months ago she'd stood shivering in a jacket that wasn't yet a secret. For what it's worth, she said, I was going to give it back eventually. I just kept finding reasons not to. Keep it, I said. It looks better on you anyway. That's a very smooth thing to say for a man who rehearses speeches in the shower. I've been saving that one. Big night. Figured I'd use it. She smiled. Really smiled. Not the polite hallway version. And disappeared down the hall, my sweatpants dragging slightly at the ankles, my jacket still draped over the back of the couch where she'd finally, 5 months late, taken it off. I sat there for a long time after the apartment went quiet, listening to the rain, thinking about how strange it is that the biggest turns in your life rarely announce themselves. They don't come with warnings. They come as a burst pipe, a borrowed jacket, a knock at 11:47 p.m. from someone who ran out of places to hide the truth. I didn't sleep much that night, not because the couch was uncomfortable, though it was, but because my head was too loud with the specific, stunned kind of happiness that happens when something you'd quietly given up on turns around and knocks on your door. The next morning, Emily emerged from my bedroom in my sweatpants, hair a disaster, looking equal parts exhausted and lighter than I'd ever seen her. She found me in the kitchen making the worst coffee of my life and said, without preamble, I already called the insurance company. They said it'll be at least 2 weeks before my apartment's livable again. 2 weeks, I repeated. 2 weeks, she said, and there was a question buried under the words that neither of us said out loud yet. I have a couch, I offered. It's not great, but it's dry. I have a jacket, she said. It's not mine, but I'm keeping it anyway. And that, somehow, was how it started. Not with a plan, not with a grand gesture, but with a burst pipe, a borrowed jacket, and 2 people who'd spent months rehearsing speeches they never needed to give. If you're wondering what happened over those 2 weeks, whether the couch stayed empty, whether the jacket ever officially changed hands, whether inconvenient turned into something neither of us wanted to call inconvenient anymore, that's a story for another night. But I'll tell you this much, I never did ask for that jacket back.